you wanted to re-listen to any of it, we'll have that available. You may also have seen that we will be sending out our enterprise social media planning template, so everyone on the line today will receive a copy of that after the webinar. So without further ado, I think as it is 10 o'clock now, we can kick things off and get started. So I hope you enjoy the session. So firstly, some introductions. My name is Naomi Linford. I am one of the enterprise social media specialists at CrowdControlHQ, and I'll be your sort of host for today and your guide. And I'm joined by Tom Roberts, who can introduce himself.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I am going to be talking to you about my experience at a range of organisations, but primarily my role over the last couple of years managing the 135 social media networks from the title.
Fantastic, thanks Tom. So we'll pick up with Tom in a little bit. I just wanted to talk through the agenda first so you know what today's session is going to look like. So firstly, I thought it would be useful to do a bit of scene setting around what enterprise social media is and what it looks like in the UK at the moment. We'll then delve into Tom's section where he's covering off some key points, as you can see here on the screen, from how he set his strategy and objectives through to enforcing policies, different training plans, and finally how to evaluate the activity. And then we'll round off with 5 practical tips that Tom wants to share for managing such a large enterprise social media landscape. And hopefully at the end we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. So do feel free to start submitting your questions to the chat box if anything comes to mind, and we'll pick those up later. So firstly, what does social media look like in the UK at the moment? I think it's really interesting to note that already we're seeing the amount of time being spent on social media skyrocketing. If we pick out this particular demographic, the under 35s, they're actually spending almost 4 hours a day on social media, and that's a huge amount of time where you've got a captive audience. And although this is likely to be higher for the under 35s, that's not to say other demographics are also spending a huge amount of time on social media. And the more time that they're spending on social media, the more their preferences are changing. We've seen here 30% of those social media users actually prefer to engage with organizations and brands through social media than they would by traditional means such as phone, email, anything like that. And so organizations really have to move with this change and be able to allow and provide support for those users who do want to contact them in that way. And we can see here 64% of the UK population are now active on social media. And as we said, that number's only set to grow, particularly as more and more users are now finding social media as a source of information. In a recent survey, 96% of users admitted that they were influenced by comments online, and that could be in a positive way, but it could also be in a negative way. And that's all about how your audience perceive your engagements on social media. If you're fantastic at responding to customer questions, then that really shows that you care about your customers and that you are willing to go the extra mile for them. And conversely, where questions maybe aren't picked up, it might cause your users to think, hang on a minute, what is happening here? Why aren't they getting the service that they need? So how you present yourself on social media is really integral. And so where do we come in? So where we're seeing huge amounts of new accounts being created in the form of members of the public like you or I, we're also seeing organizations and brands jump on the back of that, because as it's clear from the previous slide, there's a lot to be gained in terms of spreading your brand message and promoting your services. And so we're seeing that marriage of these members of the public communicating with brands in the form of conversations. And as those are increasing, that's where the complexity comes in. And this is where we've dubbed enterprise social media. It's all about how do you manage those complex scenarios in which you've got multiple different audiences who are looking for different answers, whether that's customer service, information about upcoming events or your products or services, and those just interested in you from perhaps a corporate perspective. They're an investor or a supplier. And so how do you manage each of those different audiences to achieve your own objectives and across so many different platforms such as Facebook, Twitter and the likes, effectively and efficiently. So enterprise social media really is marrying those items together. And to do that, we advise use of the respect model, which is something we've developed in-house. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of points on here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. But it's essentially making organizations aware of the different elements that need to be in place to deliver successful enterprise social media. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points here. The first being security. I think this is quite a basic one, but in many organizations, usernames and passwords to social media accounts are still shared. And I think in many cases, without recognition of how much risk that's putting your reputation at, if an employee were to leave and they were disgruntled and wanted to cause you harm, or simple mistakes such as sharing it with other members of the public, can really put your brand at risk. And so it's so important to have that initial level of security and having individual accesses. Another thing is training. I think it's quite commonplace to have training on whether you're using a piece of social media management software or you're using just sort of Facebook and Twitter itself. There's often training on those platforms themselves, but it's going beyond that. We need social media training in terms of how do we apply that to your organization, whether it's communicating in a certain tone of voice, particular company messaging, and again linking back to what is the organization looking to achieve. So I think that's a really important thing to talk about, and I know Tom I think is going to touch on that again later. And then the other thing is around evaluation. I think it's so important to evaluate both before you start your journey with social media and after. And the reason for that is before you can put sort of adequate resourcing in place, you need to know what you have coming in. So it's important to analyze what your inbound interactions and what your most popular content looks like, so that you can then inform your strategy and then again analyze afterwards to see whether it has remained as you thought and that you're achieving the results you need to. So that's just a bit of a snapshot there. So I'm conscious that we want to get on to Tom's really good stories, so I'll hand over to Tom to give you more of an in-depth introduction to himself.
Sounds good, thanks for having me. So yeah, hello everyone. On the screen is just a bit of background about what I've been doing over the last couple of years. And when I was sort of thinking about how to approach this and what I could share that might be helpful, I thought probably the best thing would be just to sort of take you on the journey I've been on, and go through a number of categories that I think are really worth focusing on, and maybe you guys can sort of learn a bit from my mistakes and where I did see success, and yeah, hopefully that might prove useful. So let's crack on. The very first thing that I wanted to talk to you about was strategy and objective setting, and I'm sure you've all seen something very similar to that kind of pyramid diagram before, and we can all, as sort of marketers and other roles, look at that and say, yep, makes complete sense, you know, we do that for marketing across all of our business. And yet I think a large number of organizations start, when it comes to social media, from quite far down that pyramid. People jump into social, they think, well, you know, we need this platform and we've got to get up and running and start posting now. And the more you can slow down and take a step back at this stage, the more it's going to help you. This was definitely the case at my organisation when I started there a couple of years ago. So we are one of the largest leisure providers, running a network of about 85, 90 leisure centres around the UK. And one of the key objectives for us when we're looking at the top of that pyramid was very much around localization. And yet our strategy had just been, well, we'll have Facebook accounts and we'll post some content that ties in with our marketing campaigns, and we'll try and get more likes. That might sound familiar to one or two of you, but it didn't connect. And what we absolutely need to do is to say, well, how can we look at that business strategy of making, in our case, our centres that much more local and really relevant to local audiences. And actually, social is a fantastic tool to do that. So we were really able to go through this exercise and say, well, we want 75% of all of our posts to be locally driven. So to achieve that, we need local teams and that local knowledge to be sort of sufficiently trained up. They need to be able to use the platform to be able to respond to our customers, because let's take a look at what they want, who they are, and so that it all cascades down. And I think 90% of all the questions that organisations tend to have around social, like what platform should we be on and what should we be posting, are actually answered if you take this strategy initial upfront session and look at it comprehensively. So for us, one of the other key ones that we were looking at in terms of objectives was reach. How can we extend our reach and move away from this idea of likes, and thanks to digital marketing and social in particular having such great metrics and stats, there's a whole wealth of data out there. So once you really define what your strategy is and the objectives are, you can start to track it really well, and I'll come on to that a little bit later on KPIs.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's some really interesting initial stories, Tom. I wanted to ask you, I think in many cases, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think strategy starts from what you're currently doing. So where you said you might have already been on Facebook and running a sort of centralized strategy, do you think to sort of look at where you're taking it and where you're going, it's useful to run pilots of new ideas and then lock those down if they work?
Yeah, I think a trial or a pilot is really useful for a number of reasons. You can actually not only sort of refine your approach and really get a sense of what you need to do, but actually it's quite handy for getting the data to demonstrate that your sort of chosen path is working for you as a business. From my own experience, we had these Facebook platforms, but I was very keen to get us onto Twitter as well. Mm-hmm. And sort of, the audience was there. I felt that we could make a difference and without too much extra work, start to have some very good optimized content there as well. But my sort of directors were quite nervous of Twitter as a platform. We'd had some historic cases of hostile accounts and things like that, mm-hmm. and I think they were fearful of the idea that you sort of turn on Twitter and get 100,000 complaints coming through constantly and all the kind of negative publicity that can come with it. So a trial was absolutely the way that we approached that. So I got approval for that, and I picked the three very best centres that I had. So the users that I could absolutely depend on. Mm-hmm. I knew they were putting out great content, and we planned out what the approach would look like. We did some workshops, and they were then able to roll it out. And over a number of weeks, we developed the strategy to the point we could really demonstrate, yeah, this is absolutely working. And I mean, the added knock-on benefit of that was we suddenly had the other centres saying, oh, we notice that they have Twitter, how can we get this? And I was able to say, well, they're hitting all these targets, they're meeting objectives and policy and everything else. So if you can bring your levels up, you can post out this much content, get the kind of engagement levels we're looking for, you can look at it as well. And that had a real transformative effect on the quality of a number of centres' posts and mm-hmm. output, because they could see the advantage of fulfilling it and being able to access the new platform.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a really interesting thing to note, that you could actually use the pilot to excite the rest of your users that there was something new coming and it was on the horizon, and use that, like you said, to prove to your senior managers who were skeptical that it did work without sort of jumping in the deep end. So that's really interesting. I know you're keen to crack on to policy, so I will move you on.
Yeah, because I think once you've got your objectives and that strategy defined, the next step needs to be to get that policy right. I think, again, probably everyone on the call has a social media policy, but I don't know how familiar everyone would be with it, because certainly in my case, we had a policy, but it was in the company format, and it was created and then put in a folder where it would, had a review date in a few years. And occasionally people had sight of it, and we would, get them to see it, but it wasn't a living document, and I think that is where you need to get it to, and it's certainly something that I worked towards with ours. So what do I mean by this? Well, you need your policy document to kind of protect you first and foremost. That's what it's there for. As an organisation, you can lay out what is and isn't acceptable, and that goes far beyond, don't use bad language and that sort of stuff. It's how you want the tone of voice to come across, and how customers should be responded to, expectations around what should and shouldn't be responded to, and the sort of time frame for doing so. But it's not just useful for you. If you get it right, it's actually a sort of central support document for all of your users, so they can really start to turn to it for advice and support. What kind of content can I post or can't I post? It might cover memes and how acceptable they are to use, for example, is something that we looked at. It just needs to be as sort of contextualized and relevant to your organization, your objectives, as you can make it. And I would absolutely recommend putting some examples in there as well. So, what is a professional tone of voice? Let's actually demonstrate that with a few post examples of what they should and shouldn't do. Having made those changes, it really helps you not only to get things right, but actually to go back to people when they're not quite meeting those objectives and say, well, look, I know you've seen this policy, we've talked about it a number of times, and they're that much quicker at saying, oh yeah, okay, hands up, sorry, I didn't get that right. The other just point to mention on that is, don't just do this as a social media manager or as a marketing team. Get that organizational buy-in, and if you can get this wherever it needs to go, whether it's in front of a board or directors or whoever, if you can get the policy adopted, you'll have that much more support if you need to go to a general manager or anyone else in the organisation and say, look, I'm not getting the follow-through I need in this location, and it's that much more likely to get followed through.
Yeah, just to interrupt you there, Tom, I just wanted to sort of take it back to talking about breach of policy, because I think that's quite an interesting point. It's something that I know I've spoken with people about before, and that it's difficult to enforce. But I was wondering, in your experience, have you found that a breach of policy is generally just user error, or is it highlighting some more serious problems such as training? Or
it can be, certainly. So, when I first started coming across it, I think it's because I didn't have this policy front and center enough. People weren't seeing it; they were skimming it to get their account. So by integrating it into a training program, by getting it front and center, it really made a difference. Equally, though, there were examples where we're consistently not hitting our response rate targets. Well, we are elsewhere in the country and in the region. Why? And it would often highlight there's a lack of resource there. And that's the kind of intelligence that you can then do something about. So, okay, let's get some more accounts created for staff there, let's get extra people trained up to get that support. So yeah, I think it can be a number of reasons when you do see an issue, but being able to have that policy document to tie everything back to is really important.
Yeah, I guess you can use that to explore, as you said, why the policy isn't being met, and then be able to do something about it. It's the not knowing, I guess, is the risky element, rather than having the breach in the first place.
Yes, exactly.
As backwards as that sounds.
So I think the policy probably does lead directly onto training and issues around developing a training program that works for everyone. I really do think this is key to success. It needs to be contextualized, I think, far too often, and again, it's certainly the case for us initially. you can train people on the technical side of the platform and leave it there. You know, oh well, just post professionally or that kind of thing. Or you say, you know, this is how to go back to a customer, but you forget telling them how to monitor it, how to see the results of what they're doing. The more you can bring all these elements together into a single training program that actually is built off the back of your policy, so it's completely contextual to your organization. So there's no point saying customers should be responded to politely. Say, when dealing with our customers, we want you to always, you know, sign off with a name if there's a complaint. That kind of level of detail within the initial training. When I first started looking at this, I wanted to provide a very personalized sort of training experience for our users. I really wanted to be able to understand their level of experience, start to have an open discussion with them, and then take it from there based on what they needed. But it got quite overwhelming quite quickly because of the number of users, and particularly there's quite a high turnover rate of staff in the leisure industry. So I was almost at the point where I was doing one of these sort of hour-long sessions, you know, a couple of times a week, which wasn't sustainable. Exactly. So
it's worth noting that you were doing a whole other range of marketing activities at the same time as well, weren't you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a lot of responsibilities to look after at the same time. So I needed to find a way to sort of get this training package more condensed, and I tried looking at sort of scheduled sessions and getting a number of users, but I lost that ability to have a discussion with each one. So the solution I ended up using was very much around using things like e-resources and video and pre-prepared training programs, you know, whether it's recording a video or getting one made, whatever you need, so that you've got a consistent training package that, you know, all of your users can see and they've had the same base knowledge. And at the very end of that, the thing I really did as a call to action was to say, you know, and you've got your account, please get in touch with me or a member of the marketing team, and we would love to hear and have a quick chat about your social strategy and what you're going to be doing locally, and just talk it through. And it was great because people inevitably really did come forward off the back of that and just want that touch point. I mean, we would have got in touch anyway, but what it meant was I was able to have that very personal conversation about experience, but it was taking up 5 minutes as opposed to the sort of hour plus that I was seeing previously.
Difference, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to ask on a slightly different note, because I know we've been talking about sort of the end-level users in your, I'm presuming, sort of leisure centre facilities and managers and things like that. But I was wondering how you filled the gaps in knowledge that we found senior management sometimes have, and how did you upskill those managers to understand social media?
I think it's a good question, because you don't want to ever come across as sort of patronising in any way. That so you've got to be careful. At the same time, they don't need the level of detail that users are getting. So, do you know, I think the more you do that first step of the strategy and sort of putting social media very much within the context of your organisational and marketing objectives, the more you're speaking the language of senior management anyway. And then when you start bringing in some different metrics that aren't just looking at things like likes, you are able to put it in language they understand a bit more anyway. So I think that alone helps to sort of demystify social and bring it more within the business. Okay,
yeah, that's really interesting that you can use potentially the same content but translate it into a language that's going to be interesting and drive their understanding of social media.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic.
When looking at the training program, I've written on the slide about progression in training. I think that is important. So the idea that you don't finish your training and you sort of stop there. You need to have that level of next steps. So I developed a sort of advanced module, and then all the sort of power users, people that are doing well, that I wanted to see progress, I could say, look, I think you're doing a great job. Why don't you now try looking at this and start thinking a bit more about you know, content planning and actually you know, tagging your posts, all that kind of stuff. and then I tied that directly into the capabilities that those users had, so they could start to do more within the platform. They could start to monitor their posts. They could use, social media listening services to start to analyze the conversations that are going on outside of our platforms, and then join in. And again, that really helps. It's that kind of carrot and stick approach. That's the carrot, and it's incentivizing people to really, enhance their abilities and move forward.
And then I guess the stick is the policy if it's
exactly.
not that. On that note, where you're mentioning that you've got some users who are more advanced naturally because they're more interested and more experienced, can you use those users to help bring your less experienced users up to the same level and sort of buddy them up, if that's...
Definitely, that's a really good idea. So let me come on to talk about best practice, because you've got these star users. I'm sure everyone on the call that's doing enterprise social media understands that there are those star users that just, they make it look a dream. They've got great content coming out. They're fantastic to work with. They're the ones that you really need to sort of encourage and support to the point that they can help to, your weaker users. And I think the way I used to approach this in particular is find a less confident user and say to them, I understand that. Have you tried speaking to, take a look at this page, this account, see the content they're posting, look at the kind of engagement they're getting and how they're going back to that, and then give this person a call. They're really nice, helpful, friendly, all that kind of stuff. They'll be great. And you can also then speak to that other person and say, look, can you help out? You're doing such a good job. And it's just a positive feedback cycle that really helps both parties. And yeah, so I would definitely recommend doing that. You can also look at things like an internal newsletter. I'm again sure most people here have sort of email platforms like MailChimp and that sort of stuff. It's really very easy to throw together a quick template and then just populate it, every couple of weeks with post of the week or whatever it might be. Here, fantastic to see this great level of engagement. Here's a new campaign idea from someone in this center, and just share that with all your social users and get them taking the best ideas and propagating them elsewhere. And you'll be amazed at sort of the creativity of some of the users. I certainly was.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's a really good, I think, a really nice practical tip that, as you said, is easy for a lot of, I'm sure, our listeners who either are already doing that or have at least a newsletter, that you can start including some of those really cool stories that, as you said, just builds excitement, and from both ends, I think, from the management side and also your end users in the leisure centres who are getting more exposure and more of a confidence boost from seeing their content shared. So that's really, I think, a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah, confidence is absolutely key for a number of users. I mean, coming back to training briefly, in my experience, there are probably two types of user that you're going to train. There are the people who think, oh no, I hate social media, it's not for me, I don't use it, or even, well, I've got social accounts, but I don't really post. You tend to hear that one a lot, and I'm not sure, I'm quite worried. They're great to train because you can just spend some time supporting them and building their confidence. And I think it's about saying, this is no different really to responding to a customer if you're in the response team to how you would via email, or if they're in the center, it's that same, you're saying the same stuff, it's just in a different medium. And one of the tricks I used to use with those users is to offer to have their posts for the first couple of weeks would come through to validation, so they won't go out publicly. I'll be able to just keep an eye on them and I can approve them. And invariably, that wasn't for me. That was a comfort blanket for these users, but it worked a treat, because with that extra level of security, they're that much more engaged and happy to post something out with the idea that it's going to get checked before it goes. So that's they're great to work with. The other type of user, it kind of runs counter to expectations. They're I feel the ones that say, yeah, love social media, totally get it. I've got all sorts of accounts, Snapchat 24/7, all this kind of stuff. They're the ones that you have to watch, in my experience, because they otherwise will, respond to a post with 8 crying with laughter emojis and things like that that might not be in line with your policy. So yeah, they just need a little bit more guidance around organizational social media and what's the business objective here and how would we respond. And sort of you give everyone that initial program, but then contextualizing things from there, I think, is the way to get both groups working together.
Fantastic. So a bit of reining in for some and a little bit of a confidence boost for others.
Yes,
I'm sure everyone on the line has experienced maybe those sort of characters or variations on that. Be interesting to find out.
Okay, so I definitely want to talk to you all about KPIs and evaluation. I've written there as the first point of the slide, moving beyond likes, because it's invariably the thing people start with, and it was definitely the case at my company. It's social media. Well, we track the likes, and going into the board packs would be a nice graph that would show a line slightly going up each month, and everyone would say, "Oh, very good."
Yeah.
The thing is, I think here in 2017, it's not a relevant. It has worth, absolutely, but it's not the metric that you need. You're not going to be reaching those people organically in the same way that you might have done sort of 5 years ago anyway. So let's think back to those objectives that we've got and start tracking them. So for us, we knew we wanted to look at reach, for example, so we wanted to start to reach 4 million people per month. That was the goal that I set. And by getting into the habit of reporting this, and I started to put these stats in the board pack, I got approval to update them and look at that. We actually, a number of things happened. The senior management got more engaged, going back to sort of your earlier question, Naomi, about how to get them involved. But also, we noticed the trends, and I think when you're so close to social and you're seeing it day in, day out, you can see all the content going and you're well aware of a post that works and a post that doesn't, and what a good one looks like. But actually, for me at least, the exercise of every month getting those figures and delving into them really helped me to spot the trends that I didn't see because I was too close. I guess one of the forest for the trees type examples. Specifically, to give you an example, we were trying to hit this 4 million people a month reach, and with our Twitter trail, and I think we've been about 5 or 6 networks at this point, we were hitting 4 million a month just on Twitter. Not every month, but a good couple of months we were seeing that level, and so we were equaling where we wanted to get to across our entire social media strategy, and that was a real sort of wow, okay, let's really dive into the detail.
Yeah.
And it was all through celebrity endorsement on Twitter and retweets and that kind of ability for things to generate a lot of reach very quickly. And I think, as marketeers, we all know that celebrity can help you to get your message out there. That's, everyone is aware of that. But actually seeing it at work within your own business and happening and the effect it's having for you is really fantastic to see. And so not only did that help us in terms of then going back and escalating that rollout of Twitter, because we could really demonstrate the value it was giving in meeting our objectives, we were able to really sort of scrutinize the strategy and see how can we transition that and sort of implement it on Facebook and other platforms that we're looking at and learn the lessons.
So that really influenced your management decision making at its heart.
Absolutely. So yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea of just the value you can get and moving beyond those likes and starting to track things like average time to first response. There's some great stats out there that you can use to really drive your performance, both across the board and at individual centres.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Tom, for your sort of run through of those 4 key areas. I think there's definitely a lot of really interesting stories that you've shared and some practical information that can be applied to a number of our listeners, I'm sure. And I think because you've sort of had so much information, it'd be useful to summarize as we can see here, your practical tips that you've already jotted down. Could you talk us through those?
Absolutely. So number one, hopefully this is going to sound familiar based on what I've been saying, it's just get your planning right. Honestly, the more time you can put into planning up front, working out that pyramid and who your audience are and all those questions, everything else will just fall into place. So yeah, I really cannot recommend enough spending time up front. And even if you're already midway through social media, it's fine. Take a review of where you are now, plan ahead, and go through that exercise. I think it's incredibly valuable. So second one is about agreeing the objectives and policy with the key stakeholders. So working with the wider organization to agree how social fits in, and just breaking it beyond the confines of your social media or marketing teams, so that people can see, because ultimately, certainly within the leisure sector, it's not specialist marketeers or customer service people that are necessarily your users. It's actually people that have other responsibilities as well. So the more you can tie that together, the better. Power users is the term that I used a lot for those, really sort of shining examples, the ones that got it and produced great content. The more you can first find them and then really, encourage them, get them working for you, the better, because they will continue to impress and bring out new content. And then through step number 4, which is that best practice sharing, you will cascade that throughout your organization. The number of campaigns and things that you do see through sharing best practice is really rewarding. So the more innovative ways you can think of doing that, of getting people talking, whether it's meetups or hangouts or anything, absolutely key. And then going back to my final point, that KPI monitoring, get in the habit of it, get that sort of top level overview of what you're doing and how social media is adding value to your organization, and then just keep coming back to it and continually reviewing it. And yeah, I think hopefully that gives you a few sort of helpful tips and insights and maybe what not to do from a few of my examples.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you for that, Tom. I think we now have, we'll take some questions. I'm just looking through them at the moment. So we've had a question from David. Thank you for your question, David, who has asked, what is the best platform for managing multiple accounts? I'm assuming David means sort of social media management platform.
Yeah, I think for an enterprise level organization, there are a number of software providers out there. I was a CrowdControlHQ customer, and so I'm absolutely very happy with the tools and everything I achieved there. I think everything I have sort of discussed could be applied to whatever platform you use. You just need something to ensure your organization is protected and you've got all that kind of the risk elements that can come with social are handled, and then it empowers you and your staff to get your strategy delivered. So for us, the ability to sort of structure our teams around various different roles and locations was really great for us to be able to achieve that, and through CrowdControlHQ.
Fantastic. Thanks, David, for that question. I hope that answered your question. So we've had another question through from Leah, who has asked, how do you approach negative comments on social media, which I think is a really good question.
Yeah, and it's one that does get asked a lot, I think. And again, I'd say the first step is to say, well, how does the organisation want to approach them? First of all, what's the business objective? And to go back to that point, the bit that a lot of people get sort of worried about is, I think, the public-facing nature of some of the comments. So our strategy was very much on Twitter. Let's direct them off to a different channel quite quickly because things are so visible. And actually, it's better for the customer. It's a better experience. They don't really want to be engaging in a sort of public slogfest of their complaint. So the quicker you can, go back to them with a friendly, approachable, can you send us some more details and contact information, and we'll get in touch straight away. That worked very well for us. On I think on other platforms, the more you just appear as open and approachable and go back to everyone, I think is really key. The better, because even if you can't sort of salvage the relationship with that customer, by continually going back and appearing reasonable, you're not so worried about that customer. It's that public perception and the fact that everyone can see. And
I guess it comes back to that 94% of people are influenced by what they see online. And
exactly, yeah. And if they can see you being the reasonable party, and it then paints the customer with the difficulty as the unreasonable one, actually, it works really, really well. And it's that multi-channel approach. I think the more you're handling comments on social media anyway and doing well, the more people will start to trust it as a source of getting good customer service. And we certainly saw, as we improved our customer service on social, inquiries and complaints and things through other channels drop.
Okay, that's an interesting point in itself, I think, something to touch on. But so I think we've got time for a couple more questions. We've just had one through from Jane, who has asked, if you had your time again as managing that many accounts, what would you do differently?
Okay, that's a good one. Well, I think hopefully I've said, sort of outlined a few of the things that I certainly would do. More getting that policy right initially and putting it in front of people earlier would absolutely have helped, as would getting the training program right quicker. One of the issues I think we all face as sort of social media managers or the people implementing it is time. It's often not seen as much of a priority by other people in the organisation, and when you've got other responsibilities, as I think a lot of people do, it can be quite difficult to prioritise. So I guess I would spend a bit more time on some of my other accounts. I suppose my strategy was quite focused on encouraging people to come to me with issues and dangling that carrot, whether it's Twitter or the more advanced powers, so that they wanted to sort of really get involved and understand more. Whereas for the small subset of users that didn't want to engage, I would really like to have maybe booked in some like account management calls almost. It's almost at that point where you say, right, okay, here you go, now in 4 weeks we've got a call at this point and we're going to go through and talk about how you've managed to get on. And structuring things a bit more, I think, with those subset of users would probably really help. So yeah. Okay,
fantastic. I hope that answered your question, Jane. I think we've got time for one more question. Just checking with our timekeeper. So we've had another one through from Jack, who has said, can you expand on who the stakeholders are in your project? Because I know you mentioned those in your 5 key tips, but yeah.
Yeah, the idea that you should take your sort of policy and your objectives and share them with the stakeholders. So what I meant, Jack, is essentially the internal stakeholders are the primary people, and I'm particularly thinking, like the operational staff, the relevant on the ground general managers, these kinds of people who are the ones that you're going to have to go to say, we've got a bit of a problem with this centre, that there's a complaint that's not been handled well, or whatever it might be. They're the ones that you want to get on side. So as much as is appropriate for your organisation, get that visible at the top levels and then cascade it down so that everyone that you're speaking to is aware of this policy and its role and what social media is doing for you in your organisation.
Fantastic. Okay. Again, I hope that answered your question. I think that is all we have time for on the question front. I know we've had a few more, so sorry if we haven't answered yours right now. We will get back to you with an answer. Everyone who's asked a question will have their question answered for sure. So we will pick those up offline after the webinar. So thank you for listening to that section. I just wanted to round off with a little bit about who we are as an organisation, so who CrowdControlHQ is and what we do. So as you can see here, we're the UK's leading social media management and compliance platform built specifically for enterprise environments, such as the one Tom worked in, where you're managing a huge beast of social media accounts and trying to achieve your objectives and supporting your enterprise social media plans. And we've put a selection of our current clients here, as you can see, from quite a variety of backgrounds. But what's interesting is that they all share that same challenge as Tom's talked through, and that how do you manage such a large spread of accounts and achieving your objectives and satisfying your audiences, from anything from customer service through to the more traditional marketing and communication side. So that's a sort of snapshot of us. And if you did want any more information about CrowdControlHQ and our platform, or any of our consulting services, please do get in contact with us. I've put my email address on the screen there, and we will share that again in the follow-up email. We've also got our social channels and website there as well, if you wanted to have a bit more of a look. And as I said at the beginning, all of the attendees on this webinar will receive a free copy of our enterprise social media planning template, which is something that we use with all of our clients to launch their social media project, and we're more than happy to help you fill in any of the gaps that you might have there. So I think, thank you for listening, thank you for your time, and thank you to Tom, our fantastic guest speaker, for sharing your insights. I hope you found it useful, and we will be following up, as I said, with that planning template and the recording of the webinar shortly. So hope you have a great rest of the day, and thank you for listening. Thanks.